Hello everyone, this is the Game Philosopher, and today I would like to talk about virtue in the part 9 of my installment on modern Platonicism, and my book review, or not review, but recommendation, is Platonism, the Enneads. Great book. I mean, it will make you a much better person, and it would also introduce you to a very unique metaphysical system that later Platonists actually accepted very well. And he was also a pretty good arguer, and he has a system of dialectics for those of you who like dialectics. Now for today, I'll be talking about virtue like I was talking about doing, but at the same time, Socrates asked the question whether or not virtue could be taught, and well, that was more like Minos asking him, but he answered it. Then he had a friend, which he talked to later in the dialogue on virtue, who asked the same question, and Socrates discussed it there too, and there's a lot of parallels. And you could actually look it up and you'll learn from it. But for today, I would like to put some content of my own in it rather than just commentary on the old Socratic and Platonic stuff. But at the same time, this is modern Platonicism, and I've done my best. I've showed you guys Platonicism, but at the same time, virtue ethics, which Platonism is based off of. The big thing is that it's really hard to have an intellectual battle with some of the later philosophical schools of ethics and morals, because simply that virtue ethics assumes that morals are objective in the world, and so it becomes a epistemology battle, and I really don't see much of that being as useful for going against, say, subjectivism or relativism, unless you want to talk about epistemology. So I'm going to talk more about my idea of virtue ethics, which is about how virtue is about building and moral philosophy is about building the substance of character. Now, Kant once said, and I agreed to it, that moral philosophy fits in the realm of practical philosophy. All moral dilemmas people go through, both in theory and in life, are both indicative of this very notion. However, there are numerous people who seem to render ethics and morality into a study of little more than the study of theory, instead of concept of the practical in society and in philosophy. And pretty much, I think that the aim of moral philosophy, if we look at it as a branch of practical philosophy, is that the function is of practical use, and that in order to determine the practical use of moral philosophy, we have to consider the definition of morality. The definition that I use, personally, is that which relates to the conduct of living individuals. Moralis, the Latin word, demonstrates this by the translation being either of the manner, character, or proper behavior. So by this we can assume that moral philosophy has something to do with behavior being proper. Now, this sounds like Confucianism, which is no surprise because, personally, as a Platonist and as a philosophically minded chap, I'd have to say that Platonicism and then Confucianism are my top two favorite philosophies when you consider all the philosophies. Just because I believe they both are keys to living a more honorable and happier life. But anyway, what is proper behavior, or what is propriety? That is the question asked in moral philosophy when it is put to the analysis as a practical philosophy branch. The difficulty we have is when whether or not we can know that proper behavior exists. And in this, moral philosophy is a question of epistemology. And if you were to say that the morals are subjective, then it would make sense that we say that like the epistemology is subjective if we are to have any sense of logical consistency. If moral philosophy is a question of epistemology, then we are to take a model of inquiry into place such as that which believes that there are facts obtainable in the world, and it is only sensible that there would likely be also moral facts in the world. If we take the epistemology of the skeptics and humanists into play, and experimentation, that is the key in this endeavor to finding moral facts. Now, when we are talking about the experimentation, what do I mean by this? Would be more, you're actually uniting theory and practice. So you don't know these things until later that this behavior is this way right now, and this behavior doesn't seem to help you out right here, or doesn't seem to have a sense of goodness to it. So you want to get away from this behavior to go over there. And I think this type of philosophy is more forgiving. For if you do something wrong so that you may improve, but at the same time you're looking at your mistakes. You know that you will always make the mistake, and when you always make the mistakes, you always correct the mistakes, and you will eventually become better in any way. And so it just takes the forgiveness of the self and to realize that you're experimenting with your moral principles and ethical principles. Then in doing this, you're participating in the good. That does not, as Platonists would say, that would not make you evil. That would actually just mean you're a little bit corrupted, or you're a little bit bad. But at the same time, when you're corrupted or bad, that does not mean that you're going to do the wrong thing, and that doesn't make you evil. So the only way to become evil is actually to have no participation in the good at all. Or to be, rather to be ignorant would be to be unjust, which would mean that the best way to get through this is to actually lack your ignorance, to become knowledgeable. Now, moving on, that as we have discussed, that the moral question in the philosophy is the question of epistemology. What do we mean by moral fact? The nature of fact being that of an unquestionable right answer, the characters both good and bad that are either condemned or accepted universally. In other words, the moral facts exist as moral truths that are a species of behavior both discovered and not discovered. Now, the idea of a child who is very innocent and naive being cruel to the child's classmate, the bully, the child is unaware of this moral fact that what he's doing is wrong, and such the child does not know why these actions are bad. But then the parents will hear of the bullying as being done by the talking of the victim's parents or teacher. As a result, the child will be forced to apologize to the other child and scolded as a punishment for the wrongdoing. And in this, the child learns that the moral fact of being ill-mannered and boorish is wrong in the context of the social interactions with another. In the same line of reasoning, we can suppose that of classical wisdom that it's better to learn from the mistakes of others than to make mistakes ourselves. Moral facts being discovered by the experience can be taught. In a sense of warning, when a child goes to a religious institution, a child is given many stories which conveys what happens, and the individual does sin or doing wrong. Learning is instilled in the hopes of the child that the child will take these lessons and go throughout the rest of their lives. Now, the other way is solving moral dilemmas. Because these moral dilemmas, when we solve them, we learn that morals are not always self-explanatory, and that they're very complex in nature, and we are given these questions in mind which we think about very hard, and through this we are actually molded to become better people, because even thinking about the moral dilemmas, for example, the classic train one, it's not so much the counter concept that you're sacrificing a family, this bunch of people, versus this person who might be a close friend of yours, or one person versus many. The more important thing is how you're going to deal with the moral failure, in my opinion. So when you answer the question of moral dilemmas, just have that in mind. Because when you are put through tough decisions, what's most important is that you're able to keep doing what is good. Or if you have to sacrifice yourself, you have to be very happy with it, that this choice was the right choice, and that, well, you're trying your best, and that you have to forgive yourself when something happens. Now, if we look at World War II, there's a pilot who was instructed to wipe out a whole entire city. The pilot had to deal with a ton of sadness regardless of what action was taken by him, and he was forced to realize the complexity of the situation. If he did it, the war would be over a lot sooner, but if he did not do it, the war would go along further and further, and so these casualties from the wars going further and further versus a few very big casualties wiped out in a matter of seconds, whether or not he chooses to obey the order or not, he actually does find this dilemma, and he has to think it through. Then, as I said, he'd have to learn how to forgive himself, which is the whole entire point of learning from the dilemmas. And so anyway, going back to the concept of the substance of character, that virtue itself cannot be thought arbitrarily as looking at these virtues and becoming more virtuous, as much as it is to build your characters. And no one wants to live a bad life. Everyone thinks of themselves as decently good, at least. Some people are self-hateful and think of themselves as bad, or as they would say, even though it's not true, evil. And the ultimate thing is that if you look at philosophy in this way, that you're building a substance of character, all you're doing is having a happy life and making yourself a better person over and over again. Now, you might not have the courage to do this at this time frame, but you can work on it. You get your skills up, and you take care of yourself, because your practice and your theory are united as one. And when you do all this, the virtues become easier with practice. And that virtue is not completely obtainable by theoretical ethics alone. you need this action. An action-based philosophy is the most important way to do things, because when you think about it, if you do what you feel is right, you're a happier person because you are helping someone else out. And if you cannot really do what's right, you're not going to get happiness, because you're going to think about what if you could have done something to prevent this or that. But yes, you do not always have that type of opportunity to prevent this or that. But if you have the opportunity, you can't just pass it by. When you see someone suffering on the street, you offer them help. If you have friends who are complaining about something, you consider it and help them out. If you have family who are in need of help them out. If you see that a conflict is going on too far, you try to end it through talking with your enemies and seeing if there is a way to set the relationship in some way that you can actually become a happier person and consider their viewpoints, or continue the conflict, whatever would work. So yeah, that's all I had to say for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and just go out there and discover where these moral facts might lead you. Morals are not really relative, they're not subjective, they're very objective. They're a thing in the world, although you might not see it all the time. Just have fun, guys.